Somewhere in the rock of western North America, the largest predator ever to carry the name Tyrannosaurus rex may already be waiting. Not as a complete skeleton, not as a clean museum centerpiece, maybe as something much less dramatic at first glance. A half-buried femur, a crushed piece of skull, a single vertebra still sealed inside sandstone. That is the uncomfortable part. The animal most people feel they already know. The tyrant lizard, the movie icon, the symbol of dinosaur violence, is still changing size in front of us. For decades, Tyrannosaurus rex was treated as a giant, but almost a familiar kind of giant. A 12-meter predator, 5 or 6 tons. Enormous, yes, but still something the imagination could hold in place. That older picture is beginning to crack. Better scans, better body volume models, more complete reconstructions, and a more serious look at bone density and muscle placement are pushing some adult Tyrannosaurus rex individuals into a weight class that feels almost unfair. These were not just large carnivorous dinosaurs. These were not just bigger versions of the animal drawn in old books. They were living systems of bone, muscle, lungs, balance, and bite force. Animals that may have reached 10, 11, 12, or even more than 13 metric tons. So the question is no longer whether Tyrannosaurus rex was massive. The real question is sharper than that. Which Tyrannosaurus rex was the most massive predator ever to walk on 2 predatory legs? And the answer is not as simple as measuring the longest skeleton in the room. Length can deceive. A skull can be warped. A femur can make a giant look smaller than the full animal really was. A missing rib cage can quietly erase several tons from the body that once carried that skeleton across a Cretaceous floodplain. To understand the true giants of Tyrannosaurus rex, the bones cannot be treated like trophies. The bones have to be treated like engineering evidence. Every skull, pelvis, rib, vertebra, tibia, and femur belongs to the same cold question. How much living animal was actually standing there? Tyrannosaurus rex lived at the very end of the Cretaceous period, in a world that was not built on a human scale. Western North America was shaped by seaways, river systems, coastal plains, forests, swamps, and open floodplains. The ground was crossed by armored herbivores, horned herbivores, duck-billed giants, juvenile predators, scavengers, and animals whose remains are still being pulled from badlands more than 66 million years later. In that ecosystem, size was not decoration. Size decided what could be attacked. Size decided what could be ignored. Size decided whether a predator could survive a failed hunt, a broken rib, a bacterial infection, or a fight with prey carrying horns longer than a man's arm. For Tyrannosaurus rex, enormous mass meant more than intimidation. Enormous mass changed the physics of the animal. The skull of Tyrannosaurus rex was not built like a delicate slicing tool. The skull of Tyrannosaurus rex was deep, reinforced, and brutally suited for crushing. The teeth of Tyrannosaurus rex were thick, rounded, and anchored for violence that went through bone instead of simply cutting around flesh. A fully grown Tyrannosaurus rex did not need to hunt like a lightweight predator. A fully grown Tyrannosaurus rex could make contact once, and that single contact could be catastrophic. But the fossil record does not hand over the answer cleanly. Only a limited number of Tyrannosaurus rex individuals are known from enough material to judge adult size with real confidence. Many famous specimens are incomplete. Some are distorted. Some are privately held. Some have never been fully described in scientific literature. Some are known from skull pieces, limb bones, or scattered fragments that suggest something enormous without returning the whole animal. And age matters. A young Tyrannosaurus rex was not simply a smaller adult. Growth in Tyrannosaurus rex appears to have accelerated dramatically during adolescence. Bone histology, the study of microscopic growth marks inside bones, can reveal whether an individual was still growing, whether growth had slowed, or whether the skeleton had reached maturity. Without that internal evidence, age can be difficult to prove. That uncertainty matters because a 17-year-old Tyrannosaurus rex and a 30-year-old Tyrannosaurus rex are not the same biological problem. One may still have been climbing toward maximum mass. The other may represent the final form of the animal, scarred, heavy, slow-growing, and living close to the upper limit of what the body plan could support. So before the crown can be handed to one individual, the scale has to be built carefully. A useful starting point is one of the most iconic Tyrannosaurus rex skeletons in history, AMNH 5027. Often tied to the old public image of Tyrannosaurus rex in New York. This specimen helped define what generations imagined when they pictured the tyrant lizard. The mounted skeleton became one of the most recognizable dinosaur displays in the world. Its silhouette influenced culture, museum art, and the popular image of Tyrannosaurus rex long before modern digital models could test how much living animal those bones actually represented. But by modern giant standards, AMNH 5027 is not one of the monsters. AMNH 5027 appears to have been on the smaller side for a possible adult or near-adult Tyrannosaurus rex. Some assessments have placed AMNH 5027 near the boundary between young adult and adult, though that interpretation is not the same as full histological confirmation. The safest way to treat AMNH 5027 is as a valuable reference specimen, large enough to matter, complete enough to compare, but not close to the top of the size range. Modern reconstructions place AMNH 5027 somewhere around the 7-ton range, depending on the model and the assumptions about soft tissue. And that should not be brushed aside. A 7-ton Tyrannosaurus rex would outweigh most modern land predators many times over. A 7-ton Tyrannosaurus rex would carry a skull capable of crushing bone, jaws lined with thick teeth, and hind limbs built to move a predator heavier than an elephant through unstable Cretaceous ground. But this is where the scale starts to feel wrong in the old picture. A small or moderate adult Tyrannosaurus rex may already have been around 7 tons. That means the giants were not simply large. The giants belonged to another category. One of the most important reference skeletons is Stan, one of the most famous Tyrannosaurus rex specimens ever discovered. Stan matters because Stan is relatively complete, widely reproduced, and intensely studied. Casts of Stan have appeared in museums around the world, giving researchers and the public an unusually detailed look at the proportions of a large Tyrannosaurus rex individual. Stan has often been described at roughly 11.8 meters long, but length alone does not capture the animal. Digital volumetric reconstructions and detailed models place Stan roughly in the 9-ton range, with estimates shifting depending on how the body is restored. Stan also shows why simple bone formulas can mislead. The femur of Stan is relatively slender for the size of the skeleton. If body mass were estimated only from femur circumference, Stan could appear smaller than the full skeleton suggests. That matters because many large theropod estimates have historically leaned heavily on limb bone scaling. Limb bones are useful. They are not the whole animal. A Tyrannosaurus rex was not a femur with teeth. A Tyrannosaurus rex was a three-dimensional body with lungs, muscles, organs, ribs, hips, neck tissue, tail mass, and a skull heavy enough to affect the balance of the entire animal. Stan shows the danger of reducing one of the largest predators in Earth history to a single measurement. Another reference giant is the specimen often called Devil Rex. The name sounds theatrical, but the importance is anatomical. Devil Rex is a mostly complete Tyrannosaurus rex specimen, preserving a large portion of the skeleton, which makes Devil Rex especially useful for detailed reconstruction. A mostly complete skeleton gives scientists more than length. A mostly complete skeleton gives proportions. The rib cage can be estimated with more care. The pelvis can be restored with less guesswork. The vertebral column can show how deep and powerful the torso may have been. The limb bones can be placed into a full mechanical system instead of being treated as isolated clues. Detailed muscle-based reconstructions place Devil Rex around the 9-ton range, similar to Stan, perhaps slightly above or below, depending on the model. So that becomes the working baseline. A serious adult or near-adult Tyrannosaurus rex was not a 5-ton animal. A serious adult or near-adult Tyrannosaurus rex was often closer to 9 tons. And once that becomes clear, many older size arguments begin to look too light. From here, the story moves into the disputed middle ground. Specimens that may be adults, maybe young adults, maybe incomplete, maybe distorted, or may preserve just enough anatomy to make the answer difficult. Some of these individuals are not record breakers, but they matter because they show how wide the body range of Tyrannosaurus rex may have been. A skull-only specimen can look impressive, but skulls are dangerous tools for body size estimation. Theropod skulls vary. The maxilla of Tyrannosaurus rex, the upper jawbone that held many of the teeth, can be distorted, crushed, stretched, or restored incorrectly. A skull that looks long in amount may not reflect the living proportions of the animal. One specimen, often placed on the smaller end of the large-bodied discussion, is known mostly from a skull that suffered significant distortion. Correcting that distortion suggests a skull only slightly larger than AMNH 5027 and smaller than some better-known large specimens. That points toward an animal perhaps in the high 7-ton range, depending on the reconstruction. By any living predator standard, that is still enormous. But among adult Tyrannosaurus rex, high 7 tons may not even count as exceptional. Another specimen, Huxley, shows a different problem. Huxley does not appear especially long from skull to tail, but Huxley seems tall and robust, with a compressed, heavy build. That means Huxley may have weighed more than length alone would suggest, perhaps close to 8 tons. This distinction matters because the largest Tyrannosaurus rex individuals were not necessarily the longest animals. The frightening body plan was not just stretch. The frightening body plan was depth. A deep torso, broad hips, powerful hind limbs, a thick tail base, and a heavy skull could add mass without making the animal dramatically longer. Two Tyrannosaurus rex skeletons could have similar lengths and very different living weights. For prey in the late Cretaceous, that difference would not be academic. A longer but lighter predator and a shorter but heavier predator would hit differently. The heavier animal would bring more momentum into contact, more resistance in combat, and more force behind the skull and neck. Mass was a weapon before the jaws even closed. Several named specimens fall into the 8 to 9 ton range, and they reveal something that numbers alone can miss. The lives of these animals were violent, and the bodies show it. Pex Rex, mounted at the Museum of the Rockies, is not usually treated as one of the largest individuals. Its mass may have been around the mid-8 ton range, but its pathologies are important. Evidence suggests infection or disease in the jaws, the very part of the animal most necessary for feeding, fighting, and survival. A jaw infection in a Tyrannosaurus rex was not a minor inconvenience. The lower jaw and upper jaw of Tyrannosaurus rex were essential weapons. Damage there could make every bite painful. Every carcass, every confrontation, every attempt to tear flesh or crush bone could become a biological cost. Tristan Otto, the dark-boned Tyrannosaurus rex on display in Berlin, tells a similar story. CT scans have shown reactive bone growth on the lower jaw, likely connected to infection. Tristan Otto may have been around 20 years old, perhaps a young adult, although skeletal maturity has not been fully verified. With a body length under 12 meters and a mass estimate near the high 8-ton range, Tristan Otto may still have had growing left to do. The black color of Tristan Otto's bones comes from minerals in the sediment, not from the animal's living appearance. But the visual effect is hard to ignore. A dark skeleton of a predator that survived long enough to carry disease in the jaw. These pathologies reveal something size estimates alone cannot. Tyrannosaurus rex lived violently, but not safely. Even the apex predator could suffer. Even the bone crusher could be injured. Even the dominant animal in the ecosystem could be weakened by infection, trauma, and age. The crown did not protect Tyrannosaurus rex from biology. Victoria, another large Tyrannosaurus rex, sharpens the growth problem. Histological information has suggested Victoria may have been around 17 years old at death, with significant growth still possible. Yet Victoria was already close to 12 meters long and may have weighed around 9 tons or more. This is one of the most important patterns in the entire story. Some Tyrannosaurus rex individuals were reaching terrifying body masses before skeletal maturity. If a 17-year-old animal could already approach the size of older famous adults, then the upper limit of the species becomes harder to define. The fossil record may not have captured the single largest possible individual. The fossil record may only have captured a few survivors and a few animals cut down before maximum size. That leaves behind an unsettling possibility. Some of the largest Tyrannosaurus rex individuals may have died before becoming the largest versions of themselves. Foxy Lady is one of those specimens surrounded by possibility. Public measurements are limited, but available jaw material suggests an animal at least comparable to Stan, and reports of other skeletal elements being larger than corresponding bones in Stan point toward a sizable individual. Without full publication and complete access to the material, the safest interpretation is cautious. Foxy Lady was likely a large Tyrannosaurus rex, perhaps above 9 tons, but the final number remains uncertain. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the story. That uncertainty is usually the story. Paleontology rarely gives a complete predator in perfect condition. More often, it gives broken jaws, partial legs, scattered vertebrae, crushed skulls, quarry notes, and measurements that have to be tested against better specimens. The animal has to be reconstructed from absence, and in Tyrannosaurus rex, absence can hide tons. One of the clearest examples of a verified mature adult is Trix, the Tyrannosaurus rex specimen displayed at Naturalis in the Netherlands. Trix is especially important because Trix appears to have been a mature adult, with age estimates often placing the animal somewhere in the mid-20s to around 30 years old. And Trix is not the biggest adult. That is what makes Trix so useful. Trix appears relatively short compared with some longer specimens, but Trix was robust. The rib cage was broad, the torso was deep. The body was not built like a stretched-out runner. Trix was built like a powerful, heavy predator with a compact mass distribution. Detailed scan-based reconstructions place Trix at roughly the low 9-ton range. If Trix is among the smaller, histologically verified mature adults, then the mature adult range of Tyrannosaurus rex becomes heavier than many older models allowed. A mature Tyrannosaurus rex did not need to break the record to be massive. A mature Tyrannosaurus rex was already an ecological event. Another specimen, SDSM 12047, sometimes called Mud Butte Rex or scar face, preserves enough skull material and postcranial elements to make it valuable, even though it is incomplete. The skull appears slightly larger than expected when compared with Trix, and the specimen carries striking pathology on the left maxilla. Reactive bone growth suggests trauma or disease affected the upper jaw, thickening the bone in response. That detail matters because the face of Tyrannosaurus rex was not just a sensory platform. The face of Tyrannosaurus rex was the impact zone. When Tyrannosaurus rex fed, fought, or struck prey, the skull carried enormous stress. A damaged maxilla could represent injury from combat, feeding, infection, or some combination of pressures that the fossil cannot fully explain. The fossil does not preserve the moment of pain, but the bone preserves the response. And that response says this predator lived long enough for the skull to try to repair itself. The holotype of Tyrannosaurus rex, CM9380, adds another twist. The holotype is the name-bearing specimen of the species, the fossil anchor for Tyrannosaurus rex as a scientific animal. But CM9380 is surprisingly fragmentary, preserving only a small portion of the skeleton. A fragmentary holotype might sound less important than a complete mount, but the preserved bones are large, very large. When the preserved pelvis, limb material, vertebrae, and other remains are considered, CM9380 seems to represent a substantially built animal, likely in the 9 to 10 ton range depending on density assumptions and reconstruction methods. The mount may not fully communicate the original mass of the living animal. Some mounted reconstructions can restore the torso too small, especially when the vertebrae suggest a deeper, larger body. That is a recurring theme in older interpretations of Tyrannosaurus rex. The animal was sometimes drawn or mounted too lightly, not because the bones were small, because the living tissue around those bones was underestimated. This is where modern volumetric modeling changes the conversation. Older mass estimates often used simplified outlines, low-density assumptions, or equations based on limited comparisons. Newer methods can scan bones in 3 dimensions, rebuild the skeleton, restore muscle groups, estimate body volume, and test whether the reconstructed animal could actually move and function. That does not make every new estimate perfect, but it does make the better models much harder to dismiss. A living Tyrannosaurus rex had to stand, walk, turn, breathe, bite, absorb impact, digest food, and survive injury. A model that makes the animal too thin may look elegant on paper, but biology does not reward elegance if the body cannot function. The most realistic Tyrannosaurus rex was not shrink-wrapped. The most realistic Tyrannosaurus rex was carrying the muscle needed to operate a giant head, a deep torso, massive hind limbs, and a heavy tail. That is why the largest specimens become so important. BMN-HR 7994, historically connected to the old name Tyrannosaurus imperiosus, may represent another enormous individual. The fossil history is complicated, including association with armored dinosaur scutes, but the tyrannosaur material itself points to a very large carnivorous dinosaur. The proportions appear unusual. A relatively slender femur paired with an enormous skull and spinal column. That combination is another warning against relying on one bone. If the axial skeleton, the skull, neck, back, and tail vertebrae, was approaching the scale of the largest known individuals, then body mass may have been around 10 tons or more, even if the limb proportions complicate the picture. A predator with a giant skull and a giant spinal column would not need a record femur to be dangerous. The danger would be built into the front half of the animal. The head and neck of Tyrannosaurus rex formed a feeding system powerful enough to engage with large carcasses and living prey in ways lighter theropods may not have been able to risk. A heavy skull supported by thick cervical muscles could drive the teeth into tissue, pull backward, twist, and break material apart. The torso and hind limbs anchored that violence. This was not speed alone. This was controlled impact. G-Rex may be even more disturbing because G-Rex was young. Known from a large femur, G-Rex was estimated in one study to have died around 17 years old while still growing rapidly. The femur is enormous, both long and broad, indicating a very large animal despite its youth. Mass comparisons suggest G-Rex may already have approached the high 9-ton range. If that interpretation is close, then G-Rex was not simply a future giant. G-Rex was already a giant before adulthood. That changes how the growth curve feels. A 17-year-old Tyrannosaurus rex at nearly 10 tons implies that the species could produce massive predators quickly, at least by the standards of large dinosaur growth. It also implies that mortality could remove potential record breakers before they ever reached their ceiling. Every huge juvenile or young adult is a ghost of an even larger animal that never happened. In a living ecosystem, that means the population may have contained different tiers of danger. Younger Tyrannosaurus rex individuals may have been lighter, faster, and more agile. Older adults may have been heavier, broader, and more powerful. The species may have shifted ecological roles as individuals grew, moving from one predatory style toward another. A subadult Tyrannosaurus rex was not just a small version of Sue. A subadult Tyrannosaurus rex may have been a different kind of threat. That kind of growth pattern would place pressure on prey from multiple directions. Juvenile and young adult Tyrannosaurus rex individuals could threaten animals that a giant adult might not pursue efficiently. Mature adults could take on larger prey and dominate carcasses. The same species could occupy several predatory shadows across the ecosystem. For a prey animal, surviving one size class of Tyrannosaurus rex did not mean escaping the species. It only meant entering the territory of another version. Then comes Scotty. Scotty is one of the most famous contenders for the largest Tyrannosaurus rex ever found. Discovered in Canada, Scotty took years to excavate and prepare, and the specimen eventually became recognized as one of the most massive known examples of the species. Scotty matters because Scotty appears to have been mature. Histological analysis suggests Scotty was not merely a young giant still racing upward. Scotty had reached an advanced growth stage, making the size estimate especially important. Earlier estimates based on femur circumference place Scotty below the most extreme modern numbers. But more detailed volumetric approaches have pushed Scotty into the 10 to 11 ton range. That puts Scotty in the true heavyweight class. A 10-ton Tyrannosaurus rex is not just a bigger dinosaur on a chart. A 10-ton Tyrannosaurus rex changes how the animal interacts with the ground, with prey, with injury, and with other predators. Every step carries more force. Every fall becomes more dangerous. Every turn requires more stability. Every hunt has to justify the energy cost. The animal becomes less like a simple pursuit predator and more like a mobile center of power. For a human body, the danger would not be outrunning Scotty. The danger would be judging distance incorrectly. A predator of that mass does not need to be built like a cheetah to close the final space. The length of the legs, the reach of the skull, and the violence of one bite would erase the margin for error. In that world, survival would depend less on speed and more on never entering the wrong ground. Scotty also reveals something about the upper adult range. If mature adults often cluster somewhere around 9.5 to 11 tons, then the classic lightweight picture of Tyrannosaurus rex is no longer useful. It belongs to an earlier stage of reconstruction. The animal was heavier. The giants were heavier still. Goliath is more uncertain, but the name fits the discussion. Goliath became widely discussed after a gigantic femur was displayed publicly and measurements circulated. Reports around the specimen have included some conflicting information, and without full formal description, caution is necessary. But even cautious interpretations place Goliath among the largest known Tyrannosaurus rex individuals, possibly comparable to Scotty and perhaps in the 11-ton range. A single femur cannot tell the whole story. But a truly enormous femur still matters because the femur had to support the living animal. The femur of Tyrannosaurus rex was part of a weight-bearing system under tremendous load. A femur approaching the largest known examples suggests a predator operating near the upper mechanical limits of the species. This is the balance paleontology has to hold. Overclaiming turns science into myth. Underestimating can hide the real animal. The responsible position is not to pretend that Goliath is definitively the largest Tyrannosaurus rex. The responsible position is to recognize that Goliath belongs in the conversation, and that the conversation itself is becoming more extreme as new material enters the record. Then there is Cope. Cope may be one of the most important unpublished challengers to the throne. Portions of the specimen trace back through a long and unusual discovery history, with vertebrae and other material eventually connected to a much larger animal. Available information suggests long lower leg bones, including the tibia and fibula, and an exceptionally thick femur. The skull material appears close to Sue in size, perhaps slightly smaller, while parts of the tail vertebrae compare closely with Sue as well. The most striking published detail is femur circumference. Cope may possess one of the thickest theropod femora ever reported, with a minimum circumference around 630 millimeters. That is not a casual measurement. Femur circumference is not perfect, but an extremely thick femur in a giant theropod suggests a huge amount of supported body mass. Combine that with large skull material, large vertebrae, and long hind limb elements, and Cope becomes one of the only serious potential rivals to the most famous giant of all. The problem is publication. Until the full material is described, scanned, compared, and placed into a formal scientific framework, Cope remains a dangerous possibility rather than a settled answer. But that possibility is enough to change the tension. Because the largest known Tyrannosaurus rex may not be the largest Tyrannosaurus rex already found. It may simply be the largest Tyrannosaurus rex that has been fully recognized. And that brings the story to Sue. For now, Sue remains the public queen of Tyrannosaurus rex size. Sue is not just famous because the skeleton is complete. Sue is famous because the skeleton is massive in the right places. The skull is enormous. The ribcage is immense. The dorsal vertebrae are among the largest ever published for a theropod. The legs are long. The hips are high. The entire animal has the proportions of a predator, built not merely to exist at giant size, but to function there. Sue has often been estimated at around 12.7 meters in length. But the length is not the secret. The secret is robustity. Sue was deep-bodied, heavily built, and powerfully proportioned. The skull approached 1.6 meters long, a reinforced killing structure with teeth suited for puncturing, holding, crushing, and breaking. The torso was not narrow. The ribcage created space for organs, lungs, muscle, and mass that older slim reconstructions could not honestly remove. The hind limbs were large enough to carry a predator that may have exceeded 11 metric tons using public measurements alone. Some advanced muscle-based reconstructions have suggested Sue could have been even heavier, potentially over 13 metric tons. That number is extreme, and it deserves the caution that any major revision deserves. But it is not random inflation. It comes from a broader shift in how paleontologists restore giant theropods. Less shrink wrapping, better three-dimensional models, more attention to functional anatomy, and a stronger recognition that large archosaurs were not built like starving silhouettes. If Sue truly approached or exceeded 13 tons, then Sue was not simply the largest famous Tyrannosaurus rex. Sue was near the edge of known terrestrial predatory design. A predator that large would have carried consequences through the entire ecosystem. Prey animals, such as Triceratops horridus and Edmontosaurus annectens, were not small victims. A large Triceratops horridus had a massive skull, a powerful neck, a heavy body, and horns capable of inflicting lethal injury. A large Edmontosaurus annectens could grow to enormous size and would not have been an effortless target. These were not passive animals waiting to be consumed. The world of Sue was a world where prey could fight back. That may be part of why Tyrannosaurus rex became so massive. A predator feeding in a landscape of armored skulls, horned faces, powerful tails, herd movement, and dangerous carcasses needed more than teeth. A giant adult Tyrannosaurus rex needed the strength to survive contact. The neck had to manage violent forces. The jaws had to endure impact. The legs had to support the animal during feeding and combat. The torso had to absorb stress. The ecosystem rewarded power, and Tyrannosaurus rex followed that reward to an extreme. This is where the size debate stops being a prehistoric scoreboard. The largest Tyrannosaurus rex specimens reveal what the final Cretaceous food chain was capable of producing. They show that the top predator of Western North America may have lived in a mass range that older popular science did not fully appreciate. The animal on screen in older documentaries was often too light. The real animal was thicker, deeper, and more expensive to move. And that makes Tyrannosaurus rex more unsettling, not less. A heavier Tyrannosaurus rex does not need fantasy behavior. A heavier Tyrannosaurus rex does not need exaggerated speed, movie intelligence, or impossible aggression. The reality is enough. A living adult with a skull longer than many human torsos, a bite system capable of damaging bone, hind limbs supporting more mass than several modern vehicles combined, and a body shaped by millions of years of predatory pressure. The terror is not that Tyrannosaurus rex was a movie monster. The terror is that Tyrannosaurus rex did not have to be. There is still a deeper problem. The fossil record is incomplete in a way that almost certainly hides the true maximum. Even in a famous species like Tyrannosaurus rex, the number of well-preserved adult individuals is small. The odds of preserving the single largest individual that ever lived are low. The odds of finding that individual, excavating the skeleton, preparing the bones, scanning the material, and publishing the results are lower still. That means Sue, Scotty, Cope, Goliath, and the other contenders may represent only a sampled edge of a wider biological range. Not every enormous individual fossilized. Not every fossil has been found. Not every found specimen has been studied. A predator larger than Sue may have existed and left nothing but eroded fragments. A rival to Cope may sit beneath private land. A record-breaking femur may already have weathered out and crumbled before anyone saw it. A skeleton that could change the entire ranking may still be buried under a hillside in Montana, South Dakota, Wyoming, Alberta, or Saskatchewan. That uncertainty is not an excuse to exaggerate. It is a reminder that the animal is still unfinished in science. Even after more than a century of study, Tyrannosaurus rex is not frozen in place. The public image changes every time the methods improve. Early reconstructions made the animal too upright. Later reconstructions made the animal more horizontal. Some modern skeletal outlines made the body too thin. Newer volumetric models are making the animal heavier again. Not because paleontology is becoming more dramatic, but because the body has to make anatomical sense. The same shift has affected other giant theropods. Large carcharodontosaurids, such as Giganotosaurus carolinii and Carcharodontosaurus saharicus, are also being treated as heavier animals than many older estimates suggested. Acrocanthosaurus atokensis has gained mass in modern interpretations as well. The entire field is moving away from flat silhouettes and toward bodies that could actually operate. But Tyrannosaurus rex remains exceptional because the fossil sample is better, the specimens are better known, and the giant individuals are numerous enough to compare. That does not mean Tyrannosaurus rex must always be the largest theropod. Future discoveries could change the ranking. A new Carcharodontosaurid skeleton, a more complete Mapusaurus rosei, a giant Giganotosaurus carolinii, a massive Tyrannotitan chubutensis, or an unknown theropod could eventually challenge the crown with better evidence. But as of the current evidence, Tyrannosaurus rex has something other giant theropods often lack. Not just size, documentation. Multiple large individuals, several mature adults, detailed scans, strong volumetric models, preserved skulls, legs, hips, ribs, and vertebrae that allow the animal to be rebuilt in 3 dimensions. The crown is not held by legend. The crown is held by evidence. And within that evidence, Sue stands at the top, for now. Scotty remains close, especially as a mature heavyweight from Canada. Goliath may be enormous, but needs fuller confirmation. Cope may become one of the most serious challengers, but publication will decide how far that claim can go. Other specimens fill the range beneath them. Stan, Devil Rex, Trix, Victoria, Tristan Otto, CM9380, and the scarred, infected, distorted, incomplete animals that help define the species, one bone at a time. Together, these specimens reveal a predator larger and more physically complex than the old public image. The largest Tyrannosaurus rex was not just a longer animal. The largest Tyrannosaurus rex was a heavier world on 2 legs. A broad rib cage, a deep torso, a massive skull, a thick tail, a reinforced bite. Hind limbs carrying weight that would make every movement a calculation. In life, a giant adult Tyrannosaurus rex would not need constant action to dominate a scene. A giant adult Tyrannosaurus rex standing still would change the behavior of everything nearby. Smaller predators would read the distance. Herbivores would track the wind, the cover, the sound of movement through vegetation. A carcass on the floodplain would not simply be food. A carcass on the floodplain would be a signal that the owner of that bite might return. Fear in that ecosystem would not be cinematic. Fear would be practical. For a human observer placed into that world, the first mistake would be thinking of the danger as a chase. The more realistic danger would be space. How much distance is enough? How much brush can hide a skull that large? How much time exists between hearing movement and seeing the body that made it? The answer would probably be less than the human nervous system wants. A 13-ton estimate, an 11-ton estimate, or a 9-ton estimate may sound like numbers on a chart. But in the living animal, those numbers become ground pressure, breath, heat, muscle, injury, hunger, dominance, and impact. That is what the fossils are really measuring. Not fame, not nostalgia, not the childhood idea of a dinosaur king. The fossils are measuring how much violence one land predator could physically contain. And the strangest part is that Tyrannosaurus rex became this animal at the very end. By the time Sue walked through the late Cretaceous floodplains, the non-avian dinosaurs were close to their final chapter. The asteroid had not yet arrived. The forests still grew. The rivers still moved sediment across the land. Triceratops horridus still lowered horned skulls. Edmontosaurus annectens still moved through the same ecosystems. Young tyrannosaurs still grew into different threats. Adults still accumulated scars, infections, broken bones, and mass. The world was not winding down in any visible way. The world was producing one of the most extreme terrestrial predators known from the fossil record. That is the final reversal. Tyrannosaurus rex was not a primitive monster from an unfinished age. Tyrannosaurus rex was a late-stage result of a long evolutionary experiment in predatory power. The species was not famous by accident. The anatomy earned the reputation, and the largest individuals pushed that anatomy toward the edge. Maybe Sue keeps the crown. Maybe Cope takes the crown after full publication. Maybe Goliath becomes clearer. Maybe the next record is still underground. But the simple version of Tyrannosaurus rex is already dead. The animal was not just big. The animal was bigger than the old methods could see. And somewhere in the remaining rock, the next tyrant may still be waiting. Not to become a monster, but to show that the monster was never the exaggeration.